Hi, Troublemaker. This is what we had on the first part of this episode.
And so you robbed a woman of the opportunity of having a child because you're overpopulated. Whose decision is that? Is it the decision of the woman, or is it the decision of the country or the NGO, for that matter? Do we have genuine democracies on this continent in Africa? Do we have an African democracy? So I think that where we are right now and where we need to be in terms of understanding nonviolence is to understand how do we accelerate on the pressure.
You can catch up with the previous episode by clicking on your previous button on your phone or any gadget you're using. For those who are proceeding, Magdalene Moonsamy has a lot to share. Let's dive in.
That's my biggest problem with the whole conversation, framing sort of Malcolm X versus Gandhi, It seems to say like there are two options on these extreme binaries. And we know enough about everybody's kind of contextual conditions. This is for apologists of both camps, right? So you have like a contingent on the left that kind of thinks violence is like this cleansing force. It's the only thing the system can understand. It does so much violence to us. Nonviolence doesn't have enough power. So ergo, we use armed struggle to, it's almost like the goal is the means, And the same for the camp that's saying, strict puritanical nonviolence by our definition is like the only legitimate way to achieve the change that you want and for that change to be holistically realized, et cetera, et cetera. The simple fact is human beings have all kinds of conditions wherever they might be, similar or different than one another to some extent. We don't know what they are. Whatever that seed is that's going to be planted, the idea that we have control, like the ability to police what that seed is and how somebody is going to plant it. I mean, where does that attitude come from?
Okay, let's take the armed struggle in South Africa. Before the armed struggle, there was Impimpi. Impimpi spies. There were spies. You had KZN dynamics where you had the IFP, which had negotiated already with the then British government in terms of land and all of those kinds of things. So they had that kind of immunity. And then you had Impimpi in terms of those people who were taken by the Afrikaner regime. And they would spy and say, oh, okay, this person lives here, this person is part of they're distributing pamphlets, and this is why you would find people's houses and all of that being set alight. Now, the armed struggle didn't just arrive. It took a hell of a lot of nonviolence.
Yeah.
A hell of a lot of nonviolence. A hell of a lot of convincing in terms of solidarity. Gaining international momentum. Knowing that the only way to educate our people was through paper,
right,
making copies. Okay, this is it. This is what we're doing on this day. Circulation of those kinds of things. There's a very funny story. I must tell you how when it was the Rivonia trial, prior to that, one of the charges was spreading of propaganda. So here are these dudes like Madiba's there and Sats Cooper and the rest of them. And they say, okay, we saw in the newspaper that you put the ANC flag onto a poster, and you put the poster all over the community. That is a breach of the law, the judge says. Now, fortunately, there was one of the comrades who, the person who was helping, who was the assistant of the judge, she had a crush on him. So she would always come back and relay the information of what their strategy was, what the apartheid government strategy was. So they say, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I mean, there's no point at which we put up the ANC flag publicly because there were no color printers at the time. So they caught the guard, the judge of guard. Says, what are you talking about? Do you know that this is the flag of the ANC? He picks up a poster in black and white. No, our flag is black, green, and gold. This is black and white. So that charge was dropped. There was no, that is where, when you look at it practically, because now they were going into where you would find, legal officers, etc. People are doing their bit there, wherever you could find someone contributing towards this. I don't think that the struggle culture people are tired.
Mm-hmm.
From the perspective of South Africa, the United Democratic Front was one of the strongest means civil society gathering. You had civil society in every corner mobilizing.
Yeah.
The 50s was the Freedom Charter, the women's 60s was the armed struggle. Okay, the 80s was UDF. The 17 was the youth uprising. So when you go into the 60s in terms of formation of the armed struggle, what happened? Mandela was then at that point in the Youth League. He went to Luthuli to have a conversation with him, to tell him. And this is an elder. And when we speak about get out of the room, this is where I'm going with the get out of the room idea. Look, we have come to the point where we can no longer proceed in this manner. We need to find a way through the armed struggle. We need to implement an armed struggle. And he said nothing to him. So he said nothing to him. And he went in. You didn't give me, we're not here to negotiate with you. We're here to tell you that unfortunately, our people are dying en masse because you want, that's why Luthuli was given the Nobel Peace Prize, because he was a peacemaker.
Yeah.
To what extent? To the extent of his own people. And henceforth, you had the formation of Mkhonto weSizwe. And the armed struggle then unfolded. The intention was, there had to be training, which is why many people went out of the country for training. They could not train freely in the country. Of course, you understand this dynamic. Going out of the continent for training, for different tiers of training and understanding levels of intelligence and arms and etc. And then there was the detachment and the deployment process. So if you look at the trajectory from that point, going into the 70s, going into the 80s, the UDF, looking at the 90s, which was democracy, it was 2 decades, 2.5 decades, almost 3 decades, before we could actually get that democracy. In this day and age, what catapults time? What is the benefit of time that we have? It's the fact that we don't need to wait for the facts that may or may not get to us in the same day or the next day. You've got the immediacy of time that is there. So I think we need to use what is in our advantage to make that the means that are necessary. And these are things that, you'd have to wait for that order to come, whether they sent a messenger, and the messenger could die between Swaziland and Tanzania. The messenger could be killed, which is why we say don't shoot the messenger. So that person is running around with a piece of paper, like maybe stuck on his head or something, putting on whatever, trying to be in disguise. The messenger dies, you don't get the message. What do you do with the command?
Mm-hmm.
Then you look as if you are not taking your orders. We don't have those problems now because there's verification methods. So I really do believe, and I want to go to the Gandhian mark because I I don't like to talk about Gandhi or anything, but I'm going to just and those who wish have the opportunity to challenge my position. So what I'm saying is that we are more powerful now, if we even want to refer to ourselves as a non-governmental organization, because of multi-party democracies, so-called, because of emerging political parties. You don't need them. People are asking in South Africa, how many parties do we need?
Yeah, how many do you have right now?
There's about 283, 284, like going on 300. And we might have more before the local government election, which is next year. And yet those political parties, majority of them evolved from the non-governmental sector, from civil society. Because their hands were tied in civil society in terms of lack of funding, resources,
and the self-censorship culture, the policing that we are not political. What are you?
So now you've flipped completely, and you've become a political party. And what's the harm in that? Because you're able to influence change, and you're able to look at legislation with a different lens. So on the two different binaries of Marx and Gandhi, Gandhi was not an honest man. He was just a merchant who was rich. And he wanted to have first-class treatment. And you know that the National Indian Congress was formed before the ANC. The level of opportunism of a man who 90% of the people that came into South Africa were slaves, and the remaining were brought in by Gandhi were merchants, which is why you have a very significant, very wealthy Indian community who all love Gandhi because their history. And I don't not love Gandhi because he didn't give my family money or something for them to establish themselves and to be merchants or entrepreneurs, as we would call it in current day. But it's because he ran a cooperative where he had, people he was self-sufficient. He comes in, he starts negotiating with the British on African soil, establishes a political party, takes that political party into the confidence of the British. Many fortunate, privileged Indians were then adopted into this kind of culture and given that, dispensed of that privilege was dispensed upon them. And what could they care any further about those who were brought up in poverty, those who understand what it is like to have a huge pot with one tea bag floating around it to feed 8 children and 2 parents, and then you just put in sugar and that's what you're going to have for dinner, and for breakfast and for lunch. So I think the poverty of the ideas of Gandhi, which is why it doesn't surprise me in terms of his assassination, because he could not care about his own people in India, but decided to take affairs and opportunity for himself in South Africa. X, on the other hand, understood the human being, humankind, and he was able to say, there's an analogy of we built the table that you eat on. It's time for us to ask you to leave the room because we are going to eat from that table that we built. The common slave, the person who's the janitor, the person who's cleaning up the streets and the garbage. No, the carpenter who built that table, who lives in his carpentering facility, he should be able to sit and eat at that table equally. And that is why my inclination towards, because this is now also with Gandhi, it's the issue of caste and class and race. those who arrived on the ships as slaves were mainly from the south of India, because the route was shorter then, and they were dark-skinned. So no one really saw, I mean, maybe the language was a barrier, but no one really, I mean, the interaction between the Indian and the original inhabitants of I mean, these are generations before myself, fine, because they were slaves in the sugarcane plantations, slaves in the coal mines, etc., slaves. And then you brought in a specific caste with a specific class to be entrepreneurs, which you negotiated with the British government on, because you obviously then had allies during the period of occupation and that which still lingers in India during and post-democracy. So for me, I think the caste class aspect, the declassification of people. You know, when Samora Machel was consulting with Mugabe when they were getting close to independence, Mugabe gave Samora Machel one piece of advice. He said to him, do not separate the Portuguese and the Mozambicans. Tell your people they are all Mozambicans. That will bring unity amongst your people. The national question in South Africa isn't addressed, which is why you find South Africans calling themselves refugees, wanting to go, white Afrikaner South Africans to go to the United States, and not see themselves as South Africans, contributing towards the economy and productivity of the nation. It's a race issue, yes, because I'm more privileged, because I'm white. It's just by default. Sorry. And this is the same mentality of what is referred to as the Dalit, the untouchables in Indian society, the rejected, because your skin color doesn't qualify you.
Yeah.
You know? So yes, race, caste, and class. I think that if that can be, well, class, definitely. You know, those who inherited class, who were, let's go to the Russian Revolution, the feudal system. Those were already czars and those who had inherited empires and all of these kind of things. When the proletariat took to the streets, it was not an issue of industrial revolution. It was an issue of land, the feudal system. And land gives people dignity. It removes the aspect of class. Whether you're given a home, you know, in Africa we like to have big houses and big properties with plots and all. You look at the Chinese and how they both going up because of populated, etc. The way the Japanese live, you know, absolutely small. You walk in, it's a walk in, walk out because of the hours of working, etc., depending on the generation. In Africa, we've got land. And if we can use land to eliminate the aspect of class, it's so easy to declassify race. Because then I have my dignity. I've got the confidence. I've got the ability to see myself in the context of being, I've got a home.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I've got my own garden. I can grow my own. I've got that. So this is the by any means necessary in the current class race destigmatization that we need to, and how do we do that with nonviolence? That's very easy. It's a most simplistic task. is, to look at tenure in any state and to say, okay, the land that is productive, that is not overutilized and redundant, give that land to a people who need to build a house. Because a house is not like agriculture where you can outuse that land and it becomes, it's not like a pastoral arrangement where you're moving animals around and then it grows and they can go back and feed off that. Now it is absolutely out of any nutrient benefit, so you can build on that land. That's the kind of thinking that we need to go into in terms of giving back restoration. Because the thing even of reparation is not going to work. I mean, you look at what happened even in the Holocaust. Reparation is still a massive challenge for purposes of posterity of what was left behind in that part of the world at the time. But you look at reparation for Africans, and I think it was France that recently returned some belongings to, I'm not sure, I can't now recall with confidence. You may remember.
Was it Benin?
Yeah, I think it was in the West, yes. Somewhere they returned, but it was a francophone.
Dahomey is where?
I can't think right now, but I know that they returned some remnants. But we don't know, okay, fine, it was a step. But how do we then get the European Union as a collective? Because that's where the 1884 comes in. Because the UK you can engage with on a separate level. Well, I wouldn't say that, well, okay, fine.
Comparatively speaking?
Speaking, engage the European Union as the African Union to say, let's speak about reparation. Let's speak about the fact that the crown jewels are South African diamonds and South African gems, Zambian, Tanzanian. You want to strip that crown and give us that, whatever, Tanzanite that you have in that. We're prepared to negotiate as Africa. Which of these pieces to have our dignity back? And that is, I think, another by any means necessary. You have to get, at some point, there's two styles of execution. One is a person standing up, or one a person on their knees. And once you get a person on their knees, you make them vulnerable. And how do we make the powers that be vulnerable? What are we exposing to what extent? To what extent does freedom of speech become traumatic? That you must think about what you say, because you are not speaking from your imagination. You're speaking the fact of what you see and what you relate with. And I think that that's where the accountability issue of creating our own means of, like you are doing with a podcast, own means of media communication and expanding on it, so that it's a radio station that reaches out and people hear a different voice, a different narrative. Because a narrative is so predictable. You don't even need to watch, the news to know what's going to happen next, whether there's going to be a realignment in the West. You can tell, okay, this is the what's going to happen. The threat that was made to bomb the personal residence of Netanyahu, that is predictable. Because that will teach you, what about my kids? What about the kids of now? You don't relate to it because you live in it's not even a glass house. What is it? In a concrete or reinforced steel protected property. So you don't have to care about the hunger. Children who are shot at whilst they are getting food. Is that what we are going to be intimidated by? So for me, by any means necessary, is for us to first allow ourselves to be free of the guilt of intimidation. Because yes, we've never been cowards. And those that we come up against are not yielding back on their action. But the moment we go on our knees as a majority, it's when we lose our power and we execute it.
Before we go to our final brief segment of this episode, I would like to give you a chance to add anything that you might have wanted to say about by any means necessary, which you haven't said already.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think by any means necessary, I think it's all about, one is firstly understanding the conditions, the objective and subjective realities that are affecting a situation as it stands. Because it may not be relative in all, it's not homogeneous. So you might find that in one, you need to now start looking with different lenses because of development that has happened and, infrastructure that has come in. Okay, so now we know where, and there was something that Thabo Mbeki did which was very phenomenal. He identified 21 poverty pockets in the country during his tenure. And he said, by the time I leave office, those 21 poverty pockets must have been exonerated into the economic mainstream at some level or another. They must be, whether it's in the informal economy or whether it's in the formal economy. And simple, 21 poverty pockets. Small little communities that needed a bit of a boost. So that's what we need to do. We need to do diagnostics. We need to understand the diagnostic. It's not now just a whole lot of people, people are now thinking the exposure to different kinds of materials, environments, creates them to challenge you. That's why I refer to it as a battle of ideas. So now we need to say, okay, fine. Do we have one common mind? And what is that common mind's goal? Is it humanity? Is it violence or non-violence, or is it humanity? And let's take humanity, protecting humanity and the human race. Whether it's your enemy or your friend, the ability to exercise kindness and care must be at the core of every human being who sees themselves in some kind of a revolutionary act. Because revolutionary people see it as, in South Africa they say, rooi gevaar, red danger, or swart gevaar, black danger. Be careful if it's black. Be careful if it's red. Because they're afraid that the ANC was a communist party and all of that. I mean, all you wanted was freaking freedom and to be able to walk and not be 6 p.m. getting imprisoned because you're on the street and you are not home as yet and the lights are not shut down. So we need to understand and identify who are we at the core and who do we want to associate with at the core. Because that is one step towards making the wrong move in terms of how do you then mobilize like-minded thinking people? That the intention, and then how do you diagnose the environment? Which environment? Yes, you've got organizations all over the world, but do you know where that organization is located and what is the benefit to that community that organization is dispensing? Do you need to protect that community if they are in an environment where there is rebels or militants, etc.? Do they need to have weapons? We're not speaking about, we're speaking of protecting, self-protecting. How do they protect themselves? Do we have the means to insulate their properties from being burnt with a fire or a bomb? Do we have the ability to create bomb shelters and protective housing for these communities who are in these? Because when we're speaking about nonviolence, we must understand the extreme level of violence that is out there. So once you exhaust all of those things to say, oh no, we can build bunkers, we can build a secure environment, high walls, there's a moat around it. To get in, you've got to use the bridge. The bridge is lifted in the evening. I'm happy with that. Protected environment, okay? So we need to do that diagnostic analysis of the environment. And then we need to say, okay, fine. How do we expand if there need be? It's very simple. You just need how do we expand this to the next community and the next community and the next, so that we have a spirit of reconstruction. But I believe that if in the mind there is no understanding of the vision of a world that is, save the children, what is Richard Branson's, he's got his own Operation Hope, I think it's called. There's one foundation by the Bryants in the United States, also something to do with hope. These really huge U.S. aid and these really huge action aid and all of these huge funding capabilities, etc., foundations and all of that. Are we able to understand? I mean, look at Habitat for Humanity, for that matter. That was Carter's project, if I'm not mistaken. Jimmy Carter, yeah. And we had a project in South Africa where they built quite a number of houses. We still have the organization running in South Africa, which is really visionary thinking. Because what you're doing is you're giving a person a tangible. Because when you speak nonviolence, it's non-tangible. We need to give tangible means of a nonviolent struggle to protect the human and the one who is, advancing that struggle equally. Because we ultimately become targets of a nonviolent struggle. Because nobody wants a nonviolent person around a war. Why are you being, I remember when the women, people who did not even know how to use weapons, in the initial stages of the recurrence of the war in Ukraine, they were just picking up their guns, etc., and just joining the frontiers and the soldiers at their own risk. And how do we then, that patriotism, how do we build an African patriotism? How do we build a global patriotism? Through climate change? Is that not one of the aspects that people cannot consolidate around? Because it has an impact on every life? So that, I think, is where my contribution to By Any Means Necessary comes in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that there's one kind of thing that's dancing around this conversation. Maybe we haven't hit it on the nose, which is when we say by any means necessary, the sort of like, who is doing this evaluation? Who decides what the options for means are, and who decides what is considered necessary? I don't know if we always situate ourselves in consciously when we think about the means of struggle. And I think, we don't, policing is something we need to eradicate from our psyches. It's so normative at this point. And we often do this in our struggle as well. I mean, there's holding people to account. There's having strategic conversations about the morality or ethics of something. Those might be legitimate things, but I think often this is a sensitive phrase, by any means necessary, and I think often people enter, whatever their position about it is, they enter that discussion thinking like, I'm the one to police the ethics or the strategy or what this is. But But the very assumption that somebody should, be the one that has that say more than others, I think is something that we haven't really talked about at length here. But for me, it's been kind of dancing around the conversation.
If I may, very briefly.
Sure.
I think that, when you identify yourself as a leader, or when you are identified by your people as a leader, and this is where the competency and, the issues of leadership in the continent and globally come in. You understand the power of delegation. So the policing aspect goes out the window.
Mm.
Because you can say with trust and confidence, okay, I know your capabilities in this area. I know your capabilities in that area. Deliver on X, Y, and Z by this date and this time. An unled or a misled project is extremely mortifying, because it's so easy to be misled, especially when your tummy's growling. I don't mean it in any other way, but literally. So, indeed, and this is why, whether you decide in your capacity to decide to create a movement and lead that movement, and those who know that you are the best fit, then you immediately start doing a succession planning, where you start preparing your next leadership tier.
I mean, otherwise, by definition, it wouldn't be a movement. If there's no
preparation.
If it's going to be me forever.
Exactly. So that's the first thing. I think succession planning is one of the weaknesses that you have, and delegation is the strength. And that delegation creates future leaders. The ability to say, okay, this fit doesn't work for you. Let's try this one out. Or you've gained enough skill in this area. Let's build you. Because you want a multifaceted leader. You don't want a leader who's just thinking without dimensions.
There are also some movements that use kind of like rotational leadership. So you identify like the roles of things that need to be done. And I was talking with somebody in Germany who she felt very happy to be in that kind of arrangement with her comrades because she got to learn new skills. And she's like, I may not be the best one at, I don't know, social media or, training people on stuff or doing, hands-on labor or something. But she was grateful for that chance, to try and succeed or fail or learn just for a few weeks, but without the attachment, and then move on to another thing, which may not have been the goal of their movement, but there are like alternative models for how to do this.
But, that's why the heart of an activist is one that you can see. It's not one that speaks, because it's just the nature. Having that, you see, when we went to Mama C, you can see this is a home. You just come here to rest. That's the heart of an activist. You can grow old, it will never leave you. Whether you're exercising activism in any kind of shape or form, you will be able to see the opportunist from one that is just genuine and authentic and saying, I really want this. But once you allow that space for opportunism to come in, and that within which period it will come in, once your movement starts to grow. And who once thought that it wouldn't even live 6 months and has gone past their expiry date? They will want to come in. This is what you call the staff rider in politics, the one who comes in and rides on the benefit and the work of what everybody else has done.
Proximity, yeah.
So for me, I'm not disillusioned by that, because that's very easy to cure. But indeed, I think that, the issues of leadership, the rethinking of leadership, and it's and you don't need to be a sole leader. You know, you can lead with a collective and take collective opinion. So, but you need to be able to provide direction to those who so desperately, you know, there are so many. Let's look at COVID. I just want to be very, very quick about this. COVID caused so many people loss of life through the pandemic, but also the posthumous effects of people who have had effects of COVID from the isolation and etc., who need therapy. You know, mental wellness is now such a big aspect of society. And you take that person and you give them a purpose. While they are, I mean, I read an article where someone died of isolation because he just couldn't, you know, integrate into or transition into society again. But you take that person, you give them a purpose, even if it is at their laptop. You're reaching out to a person who now feels the ability that I have a reason.
Yeah.
You know? And for me,
sense of
I
purpose.
don't think we've got any room for excuses right now, because there's so much disillusionment. Yes, people are apathetic, but not apathetic to a point that if you say to them, okay, you want to cry foul or cry wolf all the time, let me challenge you and say, can you do this for me?
Yeah.
And show that you're making a positive contribution in your way. And one day you can then tell your children and their children's children, my dad was part of this movement, or my mom was part of this movement, or I was part of this movement. Take your apathy and turn it into something constructive. It's just a matter of how people are being spoken to and how you don't need to worry about the war. It's not your problem.
It's kind of like movement culture to demonize mainstream society for being apathetic. And it's just this blanket assumption. It feels like such an easy excuse for like why we're not winning. Because, I mean, the number one reason why somebody does something is because somebody asks them, hey, can you do this? So sometimes it really is that simple. Like, start with that delegation thing. It's not even about like who has the most power in our hierarchy. It's just like these things need to get done. We also need more people in order to get power. So like, can you do this? I had the pleasure of kind of running into some years back kind of like a nascent movement in Denmark of people that were struggling to protect their health benefits in the welfare state. Because, you know, I have some kind of disability, I'm at home, I need to prove that I've applied for a certain number of interviews, or I've jumped through a certain number of hoops, I've worked like 4 hours this week, or I've done, you know, and they're always going back to offices and they have to meet with a state social worker. And so these people actually built like a really beautiful movement, because a lot of these people are living in relative isolation. Mm-hmm. You know, they're at home. They're because of any conditions, health conditions, maybe they're just at home. Maybe their family members are not there, or they have to work, so they're not at home, right?
But also the weather conditions is really cold. So
the weather conditions is cold for any number of reasons. People are kind of isolated from each other. So they started to make Facebook groups. It's not like the most intuitive way to like build a movement, but people would find like the Facebook group for that movement in their town. Mm-hmm. And then they would try to see like, yeah, I'm at home. I have some time. Yeah. You know, like I can make the banner, or I can, you know, I don't know, make some drawings to encourage people, or I can cook the food, or whatever it is that you can do. And so that spirit of participation got so much mass involvement. And at some, I got to know about them at a point where they're now building alliances with the social workers that they have to go to get their stamp of approval, you know, or whatever, to get their paperwork in order to keep their benefits. And you would find like the social workers, like if they gathered for a protest, lots of hugs, you know, lots of participatory culture. And the social workers would sometimes come to the windows and like raise a fist of solidarity or something to show like, I know I'm in the system, but I realize that, you see, it's not against me. It's about building that healthy society together, sharing responsibility, you know. I'm here in my capacity. I can help you get your benefits, you know, like, to me, that was so beautiful. And I find it so sad that in movement culture, everything often becomes about resistance. Yes, we need to resist. There's a lot of things we need to resist. And without apology, you know, we need to throw our weight into that. But in terms of like that community and care, I mean, that's what delegation can do. And it's why even the more, let's say, vertically organized, hierarchical kind of movements still can't survive without mass participation. At some level, you need to be horizontal. You might be more or less horizontal than another movement, but you can't trade that culture of like mass participation. You can't replace it with a charismatic figure or a title or somebody who has like their hands on a particular lever in government. You know, like the mass people power is through actually that collective, like there are tasks to be done. And like even I've had some situations where I felt like I was more experienced than someone, but number one, maybe I was tired, but and just didn't want to I begrudgingly maybe didn't want to make a certain kind of contribution. But I do try to challenge myself, even when I feel like I might be the better person to do X. Like, who is that person that would like to try? And regardless of the outcome, to me, it's like very important, you know, even maybe as like a parent with my kids, like, yeah, like maybe the parents just have more life experience. They can do A, B, or C a little bit better than the kids. But like, let the kids cook, you know? Let them... let the dish not come out that nice several times until maybe they discover that they hate cooking, or they're not that good at cooking, or they will get better at cooking, or maybe they'll find something they're interested in along the way, you know? The point is to like have that culture of sharing and doing
and
together.
Responsibility, yeah.
Yeah, mutual responsibility, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'm so tempted, but I can't help myself. You know, that's the other thing. What kind of a generation are we growing? Because, you know, the issue here is a kid, when we were younger, you had a time that this is the time you watch TV. When you're having a cereal, you're sitting, there's a 5-minute cartoon on, okay? Then it's time to go to school. You're dressed, you're ready, here's your whatever you're eating. You watch that cartoon and you head off. You sleep at 8. This is your TV time, homework time, play time. You had to earn your way through chores. If you needed something, you had to perform well in school. You had to have, you know, there was, you had to take care of your younger brother and sister. Those kind of things. And today, I mean, you ask a kid to clean a house, clean up after themselves. Everything's there. You know, liberation is no longer then creating responsibility in, because I've seen this with so many instances. It's just, it's not something that is culturally exclusive or societally exclusive. It's across the board, like, no, I'll take care of. And yet, you know, you never had that. You had to earn your opportunity. You had to work for your opportunity, either by yourself or with the assistance of, and that discipline doesn't come from just anywhere. It comes from the discipline of knowing that, okay, if I'm not home after my playtime, which is just on the street in front, or there's some little grass grassy patch and you're playing something, okay, we had that freedom then, but to at least play on the street,
Yes.
because of safety reasons.
Yeah.
But you knew, oh gosh, this is the time we got to go home. And the whole community would hold each other accountable. Some granny would scream from a window,
Yeah.
hey, it's time to get into the house now.
Yeah. Not even a granny you've ever talked to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go, everyone get home. Time for game playing is over. Then it's time to bath, do your homework, get ready for dinner, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to also, in terms of, because we can't be building, and this is why those who are in power do not trust another generation if it's not done by force. Because they look at us as if we are just these casual kind of people who whatever perception. And do we trust the generation that's coming? That we have to groom and we have to delegate and that we have to build. Yeah. So that for me, I think, is very significant.
Yeah. And it, for me, what comes to mind is like the kind of Freirean pedagogy, If pedagogy, like etymologically child rearing, like when that child is like, it's not safe to play outside, or they identify a problem, whatever it might be. I mean, that's a beautiful opportunity to like just ask, like, what can we do? What can you do to like make it a little bit more safe? Or what can you do how can we start to solve this problem? I mean, I think like bringing people into that is like, it's really key, especially at that formative age. If you grow up in the world, I mean, like childhood is such a formative, like literally like for the rest of our lives, like most of the subconscious stuff that we do is because in childhood we experience something some way, for better or for worse. And I wonder like how much more liberated, free, imaginative, unpoliced I would be if, I mean, my parents did a good job, but if I was like really in a community of collectivism and of like raising problems together, and then in some kind of neighborhood fashion or something, we're like, okay, that's the problem. Who has an idea? And then we, like I'm very sure my psyche would be way more evolved than it is,
Absolutely. And I think that is not only, I think we kind of like think about the present, but the future is how do we create that culture that's going to be embedded also in the minds of the generation that is just going in different directions, And I think that is really important, that whatever we do, we need to think about not just current, but future. Because, I don't think there's room for regret or caution when you know what needs to be done. So, yeah.
So, Maggie, thank you so much for joining today on Troublemakers. As you go on your way and I go on mine, we have a beautiful Trouble card deck, and I would like to hand it across the table to you. And please, could you ask the card deck a question?
Oh.
A question, it couldn't be related to our conversation. It could be, what is my day going to look like next Tuesday? Whatever, wherever you want to go to it, ask the card deck a question and then just, cut the deck. And then we'll take the card on top, and that will be our response to that question.
Okay. Why do we only need war when we've built institutions to avoid such?
Great.
Then you
go ahead and cut the deck. Yeah.
Okay.
What did you get?
Modern Day Slavery Museum, North America, to highlight abuses of farm workers and identify remedies. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers, a community-based farm worker organization, created the Florida Modern Day Slavery Museum.
Okay, so how does the card speak to your question?
This is why we have the problem that we have, and that's the question. It's like, slavery is a means of an oppression continues. It's as if it never changed. We've never evolved, even though we had the realities of so many people having lost their lives in world wars and in wars that were not necessarily placed on the global stage. Was a conflict, blood conflict in the continent, and we just remain slaves. And if we remain slaves in our mind, and slaves to what we just have to be fed in the media, or of slaves to what is imposed upon us by our governments and our states and bureaucracy, we're never going to be liberated. So for me, I think this is why we are where we are, because we give too much freedom to the leadership, or what we think is leadership, whether it is the United Nations, which has now become a condemned organization, because it's no longer exercising its responsibilities as it should. And we should never allow that in the African Union, because slavery, I think, is apart from, the initial slaves go way back, and we know that that cannot, whether we are slaves physically or slaves of in the mind, it does not change the fact that we remain slaves. And that, I think, is why wars continue to perpetuate even in current day, when there's no room for allowing people to engage on ideas.
It's a very heavy note to end on, but this discussion has really been so rich. And thank you again so much, Maggie, and thank you to all troublemakers out there who have tuned into this one. See you next time.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to Rogers and to everybody. I hope we can engage soon again. Thank you.
Hi! We hope you enjoyed the conversation on this episode of Troublemakers and feel inspired to stir up some good trouble in your own community. Do feel free to check out our other episodes and subscribe to Troublemakers Podcast in your preferred podcast app. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook as troublemakers.podcast for all the latest updates, behind-the-scenes content, and sneak peeks of what's coming next. We also love to hear from our listeners. You can email us via troublemakersthepodcast@gmail.com or simply drop a DM through our social media. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, take a moment and share it with a friend or leave us a review. It really helps us grow our community of troublemakers. Keep shaking things up.